What's going on, everybody? All right. We are going to continue studying fallacies, how to refute them, how to recognize them. And we're still here in metaphysical self-defeats. So this section is called Smuggled Frames and Wrong Demands. So this is the neutrality claim. I'm neutral, smuggling metaphysics. So this is claiming to be neutral ground while sneaking in metaphysical assumptions, usually scientism or materialism. So diagnostic would be, show me the premises. What worldview rule are you assuming as neutral? For example, I just follow science, not metaphysics, as that isn't already a metaphysical stance. This misleads because there is no view from nowhere. Every method and every definition of what counts carries commitments, and pretending otherwise rigs the debate in advance. The snapback simply is, no, you're not neutral. You're smuggling a philosophy. Show me the premise. What do you mean by science, and what are you assuming science can rule out? You're claiming neutrality, but you've already chosen a frame. What counts as evidence? What kinds of explanations are allowed? And what reality is made of? That's metaphysics. Science is powerful, but science doesn't decide by itself that only matter exists, or that only repeatable lab tests count, or that purpose is not real. If you want that conclusion, you have to argue for it. You don't call it neutral. For instance, like science has disproved God. So science studies mechanisms. God is not a lab object. That's a neutrality claim. You're treating a method, science, as if it's the whole map of reality. Science explains patterns and mechanisms inside nature. The question of God is a metaphysical question about ultimate explanation. Why anything exists, why laws hold, why reality is intelligible. If you want to say only science gives truth, that's not science, it's philosophy. Argue it, don't smuggle it. Another example, I'm not making moral claims, I'm just stating facts. And the snapback would be, you're smuggling values, tell me your standards. The moment you use words like harm, progress, freedom, rights, or well-being, you're already in moral territory. Those aren't pure measurements, they're value claims. So don't pretend that they're just neutral facts. Name your moral standards, and then we can evaluate it. So using 3 questions, we can avoid our interlocutor dodging. So what counts as evidence in your view and why? What kinds of things do you assume are real, only matter or more? What kinds of explanations do you rule out before we start? If they can't answer, they're smuggling the frame. All right, metaphysical self-defeat. Category mistake, wrong kind of evidence. All right, so category mistake, wrong kind of evidence. Demanding the wrong kind of proof for the kind of reality being discussed. So what kind of thing is it, and what kind of evidence fits that kind of thing? For example, weigh God in a lab, or he's not real. Or who made God? Treating God as one cause thing among other cause things. This is like asking to weigh the number 7. This misleads because it misclassifies what's being discussed. God isn't a physical object among others, and not every real thing is the kind of thing you measure with a scale. So I alluded to this before, the who treated God as a category mistake. The claim, who created God? So what the question smuggles, the hidden premise. God is a created thing in the same category as everything else. That's the hidden premise. That's the whole problem. The question already assumes what it needs in order to land. It's a category mistake because in Christian theism isn't proposing a created God inside the universe. It's proposing the uncreated eternal source, the kind of reality that doesn't come into being at all. So who created God is like asking what color is justice. You've picked the wrong category. The question assumes God is created. That's the category error. So refute the claim, don't smuggle the premise. If you define God as created, you're not debating God, you're debating an idol. You're already putting God into the category of created things, but the whole claim is that God is uncreated, eternal. If you insist everything must be created, you've just assumed your worldview and called it a question. Deal with the actual claim. Is there a reality that never came to be and from which created things receive existence? So clarify the categories. There are two buckets. Things that came to be created and never came to be uncreated. State the actual theistic claim. God is not being within the created order. God is the uncreated source of being. Flip the burden properly. If you say everything is created, then you owe an explanation for why there is anything at all. Why existence isn't just an infinite chain of borrowed being. So two add-on examples. So a math example. The claim, prove numbers are real. Show me 7 under a microscope. Snapback simply is wrong tool. You don't test numbers with a microscope. You're demanding physical measurements for a non-physical object. All right, sample B, ethics and meaning. Show me morality in a test tube. The snapback would be, you're using lab tools for a moral question. This treats moral norms as if they were chemicals, different category, different evidential route. So you're picking the wrong instrument for the kind of reality we're talking about. All right, metaphysical self-defeat 5, self-referential incoherence. Explanation, a claim that when applied to itself, self-destructs. It saws up. It saws off its own branch. The diagnostic is, does this claim survive being applied to itself? And this is the classical metaphysical self-defeat. If a rule can't survive self-application, it can't serve as a foundation. Example 1, only science gives truth. Claim, only science gives truth. What it's trying to do, set a universal rule for what counts as truth. Why it self-destructs, the self-application test. The statement is not a scientific finding. You can't put it in a test tube, run an experiment, and measure it. It's a philosophical rule about knowledge, a worldview claim. So by its own rule, it doesn't qualify as truth. This could also be, sola scriptura. Where does it say in the Bible, sola scriptura? So that the snapback would be, that rule is in science, so by your own standard, it isn't true. So you just made a non-scientific claim about what counts as truth. If only science gives truth, then your statement isn't true because it isn't science. So refute my claim with reasons, not a self-refuting rule. Example 2, I don't believe in free will. I considered it and decided not to. So I don't believe in free will. I considered it and decided not to. The claim, I don't believe in free will, I considered and decided not to. Why it self-destructs, the self-application test. The phrase, I considered and I decided, assumes agency, that the person evaluated reasons and chose a conclusion. But that's exactly what the claim is denying in any meaningful sense. The snapback, simply and punchy, you just used free will to deny free will. So the snapback expanded, still clean. If you truly had no agency, you didn't consider and decide, you just happened. Your sentence borrows the very thing it denies. So either revise the claim or admit you're smuggling agency back in. One more teaching example. There is no objective truth. The claim, there is no objective truth, self-destructs because if that statement is objectively true, it contradicts itself. If it's not objectively true, then it's just opinion and doesn't bind anyone. Is that objectively true? If yes, you just refute it yourself. So if you mean it as a universal truth, you've just admitted objective truth exists. If you don't mean it universally, then it's just a personal preference. So it can't cancel anyone else's claim. So if your claim can't survive its own rule, it collapses. Contradictions collapse. All right, metaphysical self-defeat 6, relativism, true for me. Explanations. Treating truth as relative, especially when it's stated like a universal truth. So diagnostic, is that claim true for everyone or only for you? For example, there's no objective truth objectively. Why this misleads? It self-undermines by making an objective claim, no objective truth, while denying objective truth exists. So modern examples. That may be true for you, but not for me. That claim that may be true for you, but not for me, is turning truth into preference. So what we have to ask to force clarity, are we talking about feelings or are we talking about facts? Because taste is personal, reality isn't. Truth isn't private property. Either it matches reality or it doesn't. So we're confusing preference with truth. Your feelings matter, but they don't decide what's real. So refute the claim with reasons. Don't relocate truth into your emotions. So example 2, moral relativism. Nobody can say what's right and wrong. That's just your opinion. Snapback is simply, is that itself just your opinion? So if no one can judge is true, then you can't judge my claim either. But if you are judging it, you've admitted moral claims can be evaluated. So a quick clarifier. Subjective, I don't like broccoli, this music annoys me. Objective, broccoli contains fiber, this action harmed someone. Relativism tries to drag objective claims into the subjective bucket without argument. Okay, so this is relativism, and we live in relativism. Okay, this is a huge bucket that we live in. All right, metaphysical self-defeat. Number 7, unfalsifiability, escape hatch theory. Explanation, framing a claim so that no possible evidence could count against it, so it can't be rationally tested. The diagnostics would be, what would make you change your mind? If the answer is nothing, it's unfalsifiable. Something like, for example, a multiverse explains fine-tuning and nothing could ever disprove it. This misleads because it escapes rational evaluation. If nothing counts against it, it's not functioning as an explanation, it's an immunity shield. So modern examples. Example 1, there's an invisible dragon in my garage. This is an escape hatch. It's invisible, it leaves no heat, it makes no sound, it can't be detected. If nothing could count against it, it's not testable, it's untouchable. So you're not offering a claim that risks being wrong. You've defined it so every test fails by design. That's not evidence, that's an escape hatch. This misleads because it protects the claim from reality, so the claim never has to earn belief. So, we could say that God is like that. In the sense that God is unfalsifiable, but I would argue that it's not unfalsifiable. Because if you just reason causality, there has to be an uncaused cause, an unmoved mover. This we call God. The properties of the universe, display remarkable fine tuning. Precision, adjusting for a purpose, which would be life, is the sign of intelligence. The origin of life, the information needed for life, points to an intelligence. The sensus divinitatis, the yearning of the good, the true, and the beautiful, near-death experiences, consciousness, all that leads to a spiritual, and the spiritual yearning towards ultimate truth, goodness, and beauty. As our ultimate aim. There's nothing we want more. Jesus is another. We've all seen how worship in cultures has played out, and how the lack of worship turns into paganism and the occult, like in the Epstein class. And the materialists are not stable in their atheism. They're always bouncing all over the place. And this is things that we would predict under theism. Now, when you try to falsify God, if there were powers in operation right now, like randomness, like things were popping into existence by themselves for no apparent reason, if there was anything that would contradict the law of sufficient reason and causality or anything like that, that would give you pause to say the thesis there is a God is false. Example number 2, the universe was created last Thursday. Claim the universe was created last Thursday with fake memories and records. So this can't be checked. It explains everything by explaining nothing. So you've built a claim that fits any evidence because it predicts whatever we see. If your theory expects every possible outcome, it has zero discriminatory power. This misleads because a theory that predicts everything predicts nothing. All right, example 3. The multiverse is a get out of design card. Fine-tuning doesn't suggest design because there are infinitely many universes. You could never disprove it. That's not an explanation, that's an escape hatch. So you're using a claim that can be tested to cancel a claim that can be argued from evidence. If you want the multiverse to do explanatory work, you need a clear model, what predicts beyond we exist, and what observations would count against it. Otherwise, it's not a rival explanation, it's a permission slip. Why it misleads? It blocks inference by appealing to an unfalsifiable possibility instead of offering a testable rival. A clean standard, what to demand. A claim is doing real explanatory work when it has all three. Risk, some outcomes would count against it. Predictions, it rules in some observations and rules out others. Constraint, it can't be patched endlessly without cost. So name what would falsify it. If nothing would, it's not rational testing, it's immunity. So moral inference, errors. Metaphysical self-defeat. Moral inference errors. The naturalistic fallacy is equals ought. So deriving moral prescriptions, what we ought to do, from mere descriptions of what nature is, what is. The diagnostics would be, where did the ought come from? Name the missing moral premise. Example, it's natural, therefore it's good. Poison is natural but not good. Desire is natural but can be disordered. So this misleads because the description does not equal the norm. Facts about what is don't automatically generate what ought to be. So to get from is to ought, you need a moral bridge premise, like whatever is naturally is morally good. And that's the hidden premise. But the premise is debatable and often false. So you could describe nature, but that doesn't justify a moral rule. For example, example 1, sex and desire. So we have sexual desires, so we ought to act on it. A snapback would be, having a desire doesn't make it right. You're moving from people feel X to people should feel and do X. That's a jump. Desire describes a drive. Morality judges whether it's ordered or disordered. Refute the claim properly, give the moral premise, not just the appetite. This misleads because is present doesn't mean ought to be indulged. So example number 2, power and competition. So nature is survival of the fittest, so society should be ruthless. This was the morality of a lot of ancient empires, like the Romans. Might was right. So nature describes what happens, right? So if nature is survival of the fittest, society should be ruthless. A snapback would be, nature describes what happens, it doesn't set what's right. You're treating biology like a moral lawgiver. Even if competition exists in nature, it doesn't follow that cruelty is virtuous. You still owe a moral premise. Why should what happens become what we should do? This misleads because it turns a description of struggle into a prescription for ethics. Example 3, drugs. It's just a plant. It's natural. It grows from the earth, so it's fine. Natural doesn't mean good. Plenty of natural things harm you. The moral question isn't does it exist in nature? The moral question is what does it do to the person? Reason, freedom, virtue, family, duty. Natural origin is not a moral argument. So point out the missing bridge. You switch from facts to values. Offer counterexamples: poison, parasites, disease, violence, natural but not good. Demand the real moral premise: by what standards is natural equal to good? So refute the claim. Don't point at nature like it's a moral compass. Now we have the moralistic fallacy, which is the flip side of the coin of the naturalistic fallacy, which is if the naturalistic fallacy is equals ought, or is therefore ought, the moralistic fallacy is ought therefore is. So explanation: insisting reality must match our moral wishes, judging reality and God by what we want to be true. For instance, hell would be cruel, therefore it cannot exist. Or if God were good, suffering wouldn't exist. This is an ought. This is an is from an ought, like because it ought to be, it should be. Or so this misleads because desire substitutes for data. What we want doesn't determine what is. So metaphysical self-defeat. These errors dissolve truth seeking at the roots. They confuse levels, mechanisms versus ultimate reality, flatten reality, nothing but, smuggle metaphysics under neutrality, demand the wrong kind of evidence, category mistake, refute themselves, self-referential coherence and relativism, evade rational testing, unfalsifiability, or botch moral inferences, is from an ought or ought from an is. Spot them early or they'll poison the whole debate before it starts. All right, now we're going to go into probably the longest section of either creedals or primes. And this is evidence manipulation, data abuse, weighing errors, and evidence cosplay. So these moves don't always deny evidence, they bend it, suppressing, inflating, misweighting, or refusing to compare explanations. The result is an argument that sounds evidential while quietly dodging evidential discipline. All right, evidence manipulation 1, cherry picking, evidence suppression, explanation, selecting only supporting data while ignoring relevant counter evidence. Diagnostic. So what evidence did you leave out that could change the conclusion? For example, citing the 1988 Shroud carbon dating that dated it from 1260 to 1390, while ignoring contamination critiques and later retesting debates. This misleads because it curates reality to fit the thesis. Truth-seeking requires the whole evidential field. So, for instance, the claim the shroud is fake, the carbon dating proves it. That's cherry picking. You're quoting one data point and ignoring the rest. You're treating one line of evidence like it's the whole case. Refute the total evidential field. Include contamination arguments, sampling issues, textile analysis, imaging features, historical provenance debates. Don't curate the data set and call it a conclusion. This misleads because it turns a complex evidential question into a one data point slogan. For instance, crime is exploding everywhere. Look at these 3 clips. 3 clips isn't a data set. That's cherry picking. Viral examples don't equal the overall trend. Show the full picture, time range, locations, base rates, and comparable cities. If you only show hits, you're not analyzing, you're curating. It uses selected anecdotes to imply a general pattern without the denominator. Prayer never works. I saw 5 cases where nothing happened. Again, that's cherry picking. Your sample proves nothing. You're selecting a few outcomes and ignoring the broader evidence questions. What counts as works? What time frame? What controls? What alternative explanations? What base rates? A handful of cases can't carry a universal claim. This misleads because it pretends a small selected slice equals the whole. So we can fix this by naming the missing side. What evidence would your opponent cite? Add the strongest counterpoint and include it explicitly. And update confidence. Given both sides, what confidence wrong are we on? Is this speculative? Is it certain? Is it demonstrated? Is it best explanation? Is it probable? So if your conclusion can't survive the strongest counter evidence, it's not conclusion, it's a highlight reel. All right, so this is evidence manipulation 2. Alternative neglect. Inference to the best explanation with no real rivals. So claiming best explanation without listing at least 2 live alternatives and weighing them with discipline for fit, scope, and cost. So the diagnostic is very simple. We just say, name the rivals. So jumping to a favorite explanation without a serious rival comparison. It declares a winner without running the race. For example, if you want to snap back, compare to what? Name the rivals. Best requires a comparison. You don't get to call something the best explanation unless you list real alternatives and weigh them on fit, matches the data, scope, how much it explains, and cost, ad hoc moves, extra assumptions. So for some modern examples in snapbacks, modern examples in religion and history, the resurrection or hallucinations. So the resurrection is impossible, therefore hallucination explains the disciples' experiences. That's alternative neglect. You're neglecting the possible alternatives. Calling hallucinations the best explanation without weighing inference to the best explanation rivals is alternative neglect. At minimum, you have to compare. You could say deliberate fraud, legend development, mistaken identity, grief visions, group dynamics combinations, and test each for fit, scope, and cost. Also, impossible is a separate premise that needs argument, so you can't use it as a shortcut that crowns one alternative by default. So this misleads because it declares a winner without running a race. So a quick fix would be force a table, list 3+ rivals, and then score it each for fit, scope, cost in plain language before concluding anything. You don't get best explanation without real rivals. All right. Evidence manipulation. 3, testimony weight error. Counting witnesses wrong. Misweighing testimony by ignoring independence, corroboration, hearsay layers, and chain of custody, how the report traveled. So are these independent witnesses or the same story echoed through one pipeline? So core example, treating 10 people repeating one source as 10 independent witnesses or weighing late third-hand reports like early multiply attested claims. This misleads because it inflates weak testimony and flattens strong testimony. History lives and dies on weight, not vibes. So those aren't 10 witnesses, that's one story echoed 10 times. Refute the chain of custody, who saw what firsthand. So you're miscounting witnesses. Repetition isn't independence. Show me who is firsthand, who is secondhand, and whether these accounts converge independently with concrete detail. Otherwise, you're inflating weak testimony and discounting stronger testimony. Some modern examples. Everyone saying it, there are tons of witnesses. Everyone repeating it isn't everyone witnessing it. That's a testimony weight error. You're counting reposts like eyewitnesses. Show the chain, who actually saw it, what exactly they saw, when they saw it, and whether multiple sources are independent or all trace back to the same clip, same thread, same account. This misleads because it turns virality into verification. So the modern example is thousands believe it, so it is credible. And the snapback would be belief isn't independence, trace the sources. That's a testimony weight error. A crowd can be one pipeline. How many are first-hand observers versus people repeating what they heard? Do we have independent accounts, consistent details, and a documented chain of custody? Or do we just have enthusiasm and echo? So it confuses a shared story with independent corroboration. Other modern examples, politics, lots of people saw it. There were tons of witnesses to fraud, case closed. So you have to count witnesses, not echoes. Who is firsthand? That's a testimony weight error. We have to separate firsthand reports from rumor, interpretation, and retelling. Show independence, documentation, and chain of custody. if 10 affidavits all trace to the same event description from one organizer, you don't have 10 independent confirmations. So this inflates quantity by collapsing everything into witness. For instance, church scandal. Everybody knew and covered it up. Well, who knew firsthand? Who heard it from who? That's the testimony weight error unless you map the chain. Separate firsthand knowledge from rumor and institutional inference. Then we can weigh independent sources, contemporaneous records, and corroboration. Why it misleads? It turns social atmosphere into evidential certainty. So quick fix testimony weight checklist, firsthand versus hearsay. Who actually saw it? Do these accounts trace back to one source? Do we have documents, records, physical traces, or hostile confirmation? Do we have chain of custody? How did the report travel? Any breaks or incentives to distort? Time gap is how close is a report to the event? Detail and friction, concrete details that could be checked, or vague vibes. So history isn't decided by loudness, it is decided by weight. All right, evidence manipulation 4, one-way skepticism, double standards. So hyper-skepticism toward dislike claims while granting easy passes to preferred alternatives. So are we using the same standard for your explanation as you demand from mine? For example, all resurrection reports are hallucinations, while demanding no comparable evidential work for the hallucination theory itself. Sorry guys, I am tired. I already streamed for like a couple of hours. My bad. So, evidence manipulation for one-way skepticism, double standards. And this, of course, maps onto other things that we've seen, like loaded standards or, yeah. So, hyper-skepticism toward dislike claims while granting easy passes to preferred alternatives. So diagnostic is, are you using the same standards for your explanation as you demand from mine? For example, let's say all resurrection reports are hallucinations while demanding no comparable evidential work for the hallucination theory itself. This misleads because it rigs the debate by applying two different standards. So a snapback would be like, same standard, both sides, apply that skepticism to your theory too. You don't get to be strict on mine and casual on yours. That's one-way skepticism. You treat my claim like it needs absolute proof, but your alternative gets accepted with hand-waving. Same rules for both sides. If you say hallucination and then show your evidence, list your assumptions, and explain why it fits the data better than rivals, don't just label it and move on. Modern examples around science and origin. The claim design is unscientific, but multiverse explains fine-tuning gets accepted with far less discipline. So the snapback could be like, same standard for multiverse and design. If unobservable disqualifies one explanation, it disqualifies the other. If you allow theoretical inference for your preferred view, you can't ban it only when it points to a direction that you don't want. This misleads because it's not a rule, it's a preference disguised as a rule. A different example. My side's violence is mostly peaceful. Your side's violence proves your ideology is evil. So we see this with the left and right. The left has been more violent in recent decades in America, at least, than the right. Like the Charlie Kirk assassination. So you have to have the same yardstick. You can't have tribal exceptions. So we're excusing our side with context and motives and then denying context, So if you excuse your side with context and motives and then you deny context to mine, either context matters or it doesn't. If you want moral seriousness, you need to apply one yardstick to both tribes. So this misleads because it swaps truth-seeking for team defense. Another modern example, faith and miracles. So miracle claims require extraordinary evidence, but skeptical alternatives, legend, fraud, hallucination, get asserted without comparable evidence. A snapback, simply put, extraordinary skepticism needs extraordinary support too. If you're going to demand strong evidence from me, fine, but your rival explanation needs the same treatment. Hallucination isn't a magic word. Show why it's likely. Show it fits the detail, and show it beats the alternatives. And we can definitely use this for like Fatima, a public miracle. So this misleads because it treats the skeptic's story as default truth without earning it. So a quick fix, a double standard audit. What are the rules stated? What exact standards are we using? Is the rule universal? Does your standard apply to your view too? Is the rule in force? Show me you did the same work on your alternative. So same rule, same burden, same discipline. All right. Next is evidence manipulation. 5, base rate neglect, priors erased. So the explanation is ignoring background frequencies, base rates, and prior plausibility priors when weighing explanations, often via a lazy shortcut. So the hotkey is, what are the priors? A core example is treating many options as each option equally unlikely without defending the hypothesis set or weighing. This misleads because it manufactures probabilities by assuming a uniform lottery over an undefined bucket. So a snapback, you don't get any, one prior for free. So a uniform guess is not a base rate. You have to define the rival set and weighing. So you can't assign equal probability to every label in a grab bag, call it a base rate, and stop. You have to justify the rival set, what costs and what counts as an alternative. And you have to justify the weighing, why equal priors, and then update with evidence. For example, faith and worldviews. There are thousands of religions, so the probability Christianity is true is about 1 in 4,000. The snapback simply is that's base rate neglect. That calculation assumes that every religion is a clean rival hypothesis of the same type. And each one starts equally likely, uniform priors. Neither is justified. Many religions aren't competing explanatory hypotheses in the same category. Many overlap and don't make comparable truth claims. A real prior requires a defensible partition in a defensible measure. Then you update based on evidence, history, coherence, explanatory scope, predictive fit, defeaters. So this misleads because it manufactures tiny probabilities by assuming uniform priors over a messy category. So the next category, evidence manipulation. 6, post hoc ergo propter hoc, false cause. So this is assuming that because X happened before Y, X caused Y. So I guess another way of saying that is correlation does not mean causation. So treating sequence as causation without mechanism, controls, or rival cause accounting. This misleads because it upgrades correlation and narrative into causation while ignoring confounders. Simple confounders after doesn't mean because. Correlation isn't causation. What's the control? So the snapback expanded. Timing can be a clue, but it's not proof. To claim causation, you need a mechanism and a comparison against plausible alternatives, confounders. Some modern examples in snapbacks, modern examples in politics and culture. Religion causes violence. So the claim, religion has caused so many wars. Therefore, religion causes violence, and we'd be more peaceful without it. A simple, punchy snapback after doesn't mean because. An expanded snapback would be wars involving religious language don't prove religion is the cause. Isolate causal contribution from rival drivers like power, land, ethnicity, economic, state interest, and compare against violence in non-religious regimes and contexts. Otherwise, you're reading causation off chronology and association. So this misleads because it treats association as causation and skips rival drivers. So ask for a causal test. If we remove religion, what mechanism predicts a drop in violence? And what causes falsify that? So after isn't because. All right. Evidence manipulation 7, hasty generalization, too small a sample. You got people in the chat? Is there people in the chat? Oh, Timmy, TJ, you got the flu? Yeah, I had the flu for like 2 weeks. Josh had the flu also. Yeah, it's been going around. I'm still getting over it. I mean, I'm almost fine, but I still have like a weird cough. And anyways. All right, evidence manipulation 7. Hasty generalizations, too small a sample. So drawing sweeping conclusions from unrepresentative cases. Quick diagnostic, how big is the sample? So for example, a few vivid cases get treated like a whole category. This misleads because it jumps from some cases to the whole, skipping representativeness and logic. Some simple snapbacks, that doesn't generalize. Sample size, one case isn't the category. For instance, modern examples. Claim, priests abuse children, therefore the Catholic Church is corrupt at the core and Catholicism is false. Simple snapback, that doesn't generalize. Abuse is real and evil and it condemns the perpetrators and any cover-up, but criminals existed inside the institution doesn't logically entail the faith is false. That leap treats a subset of failures as if it discredits the truth claims themselves. You need a separate argument showing the doctrine is false, not just that members sinned grievously. So this misleads because it lets outrage do the inference. So a quick fix, you separate the two questions. Is the institution morally compromised versus are the truth claims false? So one case isn't the category. All right, evidence manipulation 8, argument from silence. Absence treated like disproof. So explanation, treating missing records as if they disprove the event. So quick diagnostics, would we expect a record to exist and to survive if this happened? For example, no Roman memo about the empty tomb exists, therefore it didn't happen. This misleads because absence does not equal evidence of absence. Many true events leave no surviving record. For example, missing paperwork isn't a disproof. You don't argue from silence. So a snapback, would be like you're arguing from silence. The question isn't, do we have a Roman memo about the resurrection? The question is, would we realistically expect one, and would it survive? If you can't justify that expectation, you don't have disproof, you have a missing document. Some modern examples. History in the ancient world. If it happened, there'd be an official record. There isn't, so it didn't happen. So you got to show me that expectation. Don't argue from silence. Ancient record keeping is incomplete, biased, and massively lost. If you want missing records to count as disprove, you have to justify: 1, it would likely be recorded; 2, it would likely be preserved; and 3, we would likely have access to it. We would likely have access to it now. This misleads because it treats the archive as complete when it isn't. Modern example between science and medicine. There's no study proving X, so X is false. Snapback would be: no study isn't false. It's not established. Lack of published evidence isn't evidence of non-existence. It may mean no one studied it well yet, funding wasn't there, results weren't published, or it's hard to test. The right conclusion is we don't know, or it's unproven. No, not it's disproven. This misleads because it upgrades unknown into false. For example, in police and courts, the claim, no video, so it didn't happen. Snapback is: no video isn't disprove. Should we expect video coverage? Was there a camera? Was it pointed correctly? Was it working? Was it preserved? Was it released? If you can't show that, the absence of footage doesn't disprove the event. This treats missing evidence like contrary evidence. Modern example, workplace email culture. Claim, there's no email confirming it, so it never happened. A simple snapback: not everything happens in writing. Plenty of real decisions happen in meetings, calls, texts, or hallway conversations. If you want missing email to count as disprove, you must show the process requires email documentation and that the archive is complete. This misleads because it assumes documentation is mandatory and preserved. So a quick fix, the discipline rule: absence only counts if they can show all three. Expectation: we should reasonably expect a record if it happened. Access: we'd likely have that record available today. And search: a serious search has been done in the right places. So if you can't justify expectation, survival, silence proves nothing. All right, we're about halfway through. Well, still have some way to go for evidence manipulation. The good news is that the category after evidence manipulation is actually not that long. Semantics. And then we're going to go into bias. All right, this is evidence manipulation 9, appeal to ignorance. Ignorance isn't evidence. So treating lack of disproof as proof or lack of proof as disproof. Diagnostic is: where's the positive case? For example, no one has disproved X, so X is true, or you can't prove X, so X is false. This misleads because it replaces evidence with a vacuum and calls the vacuum support. Simple snapback: not disproven isn't proven. That's burden shifting. Show positive evidence. So a claim doesn't become true because no one has disproved it. The person asserting it owes positive reasons and evidence. Otherwise, it's just a protected guess. A modern example, science and cosmology, the multiverse. No one has disproved the multiverse, therefore it's true. A snapback is, it's not disproven, it isn't proven. If you want the multiverse as a real explanation, you have to present a positive case. What observations it predicts, how it outperforms rivals, and what would count against it. So this treats not refuted as supported. And this is like an extreme version of modal collapse. It goes from speculative, because it could be speculated according to string theory, to practically, demonstrated. It goes up different confidence, right? Rungs of confidence. It goes from speculative at best to plausible, probable, best explanation, demonstrated. With no reason. So what would falsify it? If the answer is nothing, you found the move. Not disproven isn't proven. So this maps on to unfalsifiability and non sequitur. All right. Evidence manipulation 10, bare possibility fallacy, maybeism. So treating mere logical possibility as if it were an explanation or as if it defeats an argument. Quick diagnostic, possible isn't probative. So dropping maybe, simulation, multiverse, unknown, future science to dissolve an argument without reasons is a live contender. So this substitutes possibility for probability. So maybe isn't evidence. Possible doesn't explain. You have to show it's live. So a bare maybe only matters if you offer independent reasons it's a real contender and show it beats rivals on fit, scope, and cost. Otherwise, it's a fog. Some modern examples. For instance, simulation. Maybe we were in a simulation, so your argument fails. A quick snapback. Maybe isn't evidence. If you want simulation to do work, you owe a positive case. Why it's live, what it predicts, how it improves fit, scope, cost over alternatives, and what would count against it. Otherwise, it's an escape hatch. It dissolves arguments with fog instead of rivals. So what new evidence would your maybe predict that rivals wouldn't? All right, evidence manipulation 12, shifting the burden of proof, claim without reasons. I guess I got the numbering wrong. All right. Shifting the burden of proof, claim without reasons, forcing the opponent to disprove your claim instead of offering reasons for it. A diagnostic would be who made the claim and who's responsible to provide reasons. Core example, you can't prove God exists, so he must. This misleads because the burden rests on the one making the claim. So, prove your claim, I don't have to disprove it. The burden's on you. You asserted it. If you assert something, the burden of proof is on you. Your lack of disproof isn't proof. So that's shifting the burden. You made the claim, so you have to give reasons and evidence for it. I'm not obligated to disprove a bare assertion. If you want this taken seriously, you have to map it out. Map out your position, the reasons that you claim for your position, the observable evidence that you claim for your position, the inference of, how you go from your observe, reasons to the position. And what you would expect to, be false, if it were not true. Like, you have to make some sort of expectations and possible defeaters to really, present a position. Some modern examples: atheism and materialism. So you can't prove there's a soul, so there isn't one. Snapback is prove no soul, don't just say not proven. So you're treating not proven to my satisfaction as disprove. If you claim the soul does not exist, you need arguments for that claim, not a demand that I meet an impossible standard. It turns skepticism into a conclusion without earning it, right? And you can, you can claim a soul through, the hard problem of consciousness and persistence of consciousness after bodily death, terminal lucidity. There's many reasons for the soul, near-death experiences. Another example, political example: you can't prove the election wasn't rigged, so it was rigged. Snapback would be, you need the evidence first, not the vibes, right? That's backward. If you claim rigging, you have to show your evidence, define what would count, and explain why your explanation fits better than alternatives. So it treats an accusation as true by default. So if somebody shifts the burden of proof, you have to force a proved map, right? Prove is, let me just get... So I have to work my, I have to work on my deduction and argumentation and inferences, because I have syllogisms and if then, I have categorical syllogisms worked out. I have conditional syllogisms sort of worked out. I have inference to the best explanation and consilience worked out. But I still, I'm missing some other conditional logic and so I don't know if I need to study more before I actually talk about argumentation, but I do have a framework for proving claims or syllogisms, right? And that's called proved, right? And so you go from clarifying the position in a one sentence target, not mixing, if it has multiple claims, you got to split it. You got to lock down the category, right? So this is making the position clear, the reasons and premises. You got to rank the reasons. You have to make sure they're independent, hide hidden premises, any smuggling. Observations, so evidence for the reasons. What can you point to? What is a good quality? And see if there's any evidence manipulation. You need the validating rule. So what's the bridge? What's the inference? Why do the premises lead to the conclusion? Exceptions, qualifier scope. So if we have a strength, confidence rung ladder, if we have boundary conditions, is there scope creep? Is there modal scope coupling? Is there any missing qualifiers? and defeaters. Like what would undercut, what would, you know, because you have to know what would, if you can't claim something can falsify your claim, it's unfalsifiable. So what could we expect if the claim was false, right? Like if the claim there is a God is false, there would be a force in operation that creates out of nothing, for instance. That, and it would be observable. I mean, that would be just one thing. Okay. Yo, what's going on? Who's in the chat? Anyways. Okay. This is a big one. Evidence manipulation 13. Demand for impossible certainty. Weaponized proof standard. All right, so the demand for impossible certainty, weaponized proof standards. This is requiring absolute deductive certainty before accepting any claim. So a diagnostics would be, do you demand this level of certainty for anything else you believe or only for what you dislike? Unless you can prove God with mathematical certainty, I won't believe. So this misleads because most rational beliefs rest on converging probability, not 100% certainty. Some snapbacks would be, if you don't live like that standard is real, how can I take it seriously? That standard would kill history and courts. Certainty isn't the only rational threshold. So saying that's a weaponized proof standard, you're demanding mathematical certainty for a question that isn't math. You don't require that level of certainty for history, science, courts, or daily life. You follow the best supported conclusion from converging evidence. If you want to be consistent, you state the standard, you use it everywhere else, then apply it here. So for instance, a modern example, faith in metaphysics. Unless you can prove God with 100% certainty, belief is irrational. So you don't require 100% certainty for anything important. If we applied that rule consistently, you couldn't rationally believe in the past, other minds, moral duties, or most of science. The same rule is proportion confidence to evidence. God won't be proved like a geometric theorem. This is a cumulative explanatory reasoning. This misleads because it blocks rational belief by demanding a level of certainty almost nothing can meet. So modern example, history, courts. Unless you have video footage, you can't know who committed the crime. That would collapse the whole justice system. Courts routinely reach justified conclusions using converging evidence, witnesses, motive, opportunity, traces, timelines. If your rule were applied consistently, almost no verdict could be reached. This misleads because it pretends only one kind of evidence counts. So use a domain-appropriate standard. Match confidence to what the evidence can carry. If your standard wipes out everything you already know, your standard is the problem. So nuking the field, category mistake, shifting the burden of proof. All right, evidence manipulation 14. Personal incredulity. I can't imagine it. So rejecting a claim because you can't picture it, model it, or emotionally see how it could be true. A quick diagnostic would be confusing I can't imagine with it can't be. Or conversely, I can imagine it, so it is. So rejecting a claim because you can't picture it is treating a psychological limitation as if it were a logical or evidential refutation. It mistakes cognitive limits for limits on reality. That's not an argument. Imagination isn't evidence. You have to show the contradiction. For example, faith in the resurrection. I can't picture the resurrection, therefore it didn't happen. Imagination isn't evidence. Your inability to picture an event doesn't decide history. The question is evidential. What happened? What sources say? What rivals exist? And which best fits the total data without ad hoc costs? So it turns a feeling into a verdict. So a quick fix, you replace I can't imagine with I have evidence that. if nothing follows, it was never an argument. Imagination isn't evidence. We still got people here? That's crazy. Thank you guys. Okay, evidence manipulation 15, Texas sharpshooter. Bullseye after the shot. So circling hits while ignoring misses to manufacture a pattern. A quick diagnosis. Show me the misses. What's the full shot pattern before you drew the bullseye? So highlighting fulfilled prophecies while ignoring unfulfilled ones. It invents significance by selective highlighting. So for instance, these prophecies prove it. Look how many were fulfilled. And the snapback would be, that's Texas sharpshooter. Show the misses. You're circling hits after the fact and ignoring misses. Refute the full record. How many predictions were made total? How many failed? How many were vague? How many were post-event interpretations? And what would count as a miss? So it treats a curated highlight reel as a statistical pattern. Another example, this group is always corrupt. Look at these 10 scandals in the church or whatever. That's not analysis. That's a highlight reel. You collected scandals and drew the target around them. Show the denominator, total cases, clean outcomes, comparisons to other groups, and whether you're selecting whatever confirms your story. So it manufactures a pattern without a reference class. So another example, manifestation works. Every time I visualize success, something good happens. That's Texas sharpshooter. Where are the misses? You're counting hits and forgetting nothing happened. Track every attempt to find success up front. Compare to chance or ordinary effort. It confuses selective memory with evidence. Online predictions and guru. This guy predicted everything. Look at these clips. Show me the full archive, not the edit. Show every prediction, timestamp, including failures and vague statements. Otherwise, you're grading a story, not evaluating accuracy. He replaces auditability with montage. So quick fix, sharpshooter audit. What's the total set? All predictions, all data points, all attempts. What counts as a miss? Define that up front. How many misses are there? List them. What's the base rate? How often would hits happen anyways? Don't circle the hits, show the whole target. All right, evidence manipulation 16, survivorship bias, the unseen denominator. Okay, focusing on visible survivors while ignoring failures and non-cases. Diagnostic, where's the denominator? Show me the failures and the non-cases. For example, these few saints had visions, so visions are common. It skews probabilities by hiding the full denominator. So the claim, so many saints had visions, visions must be common. That's survivorship bias. You're ignoring the denominator. You're focusing on famous cases and ignoring millions of faithful lives with no visions. Refute the denominator. How many pursued holiness? How many reported nothing? How many reports were filtered out as unreliable? And what proportion remains after screening? It treats a highlight reel as the base rate. And this is why it misleads. For instance, in business and in entrepreneurship, if you grind, you'll make it. Look at these founders who started broke. That's survivorship bias. Where are the thousands who grinded and didn't make it? You're looking at survivors and calling it a formula. Show the denominator. How many tried with similar effort and failed, and what variables actually explain outcomes? Timing, capital, network, product, market, competence. It confuses survivor stories with survivors' cases, with survivors' causes. So fitness and supplements. This program works. Look at these insane transformations. Show me everyone who didn't transform. You're seeing best responders and the most disciplined, the ones who stayed and posted. Where's the denominator? How many started? How many quit? How many got average results? How many had setbacks or injuries? It counts visible wins and hides dropouts. Long distance always works if it's meant to be. Look at these couples. That's survivorship bias. You're only seeing the couples that survived. To claim always works, you need the denominator. How many tried? How many failed? And what variables matter? Trust, timeline, distance, money, maturity. It builds a rule out of survivors and ignores the graveyard. Modern example, war, history, toughness. Hard times create strong men. Look at the legends who came out of war. That's survivorship bias. You're not counting the broken. You're counting the symbols that ignoring the denominator. Those killed, traumatized, addicted, or morally ruined. Count the full cost, not just the heroes. It turns selective survival into universal law. So a quick fix or the survivorship audit. Who's missing from the sample? Dropouts, failures, silent majority. How many total tried? The denominator. What filters selected the survivors? Screening, platforms, incentives, frame. Does the claim survive once you include the missing cases? Okay, guys. We're close. We're close. I'm tired too, okay? I'm not going to lie. How long have we been? An hour and a half. Okay. Evidence substitutions. Evidential talk as evidence. Replacing evidence with likelihood flavored rhetoric. unlikely, countless alternatives, and treating the rhetoric like data. Show me the data, not the vibe. Probability sounding talk replaces measurements, observations, testimony, experiments, or documents. This misleads because it dresses intuition in probability language and calls it an argument. Simple snapbacks, that's not evidence, show me the data, likelihood isn't proof. An expanded snapback, likely unlikely claims only count if you specify the measure, list rivals, and anchor the claim in actual evidence, not intuition or word math. Some modern examples in snapbacks, science and fine-tuning. Any universe would seem improbable. There are countless conceivable alternatives, so your fine-tuning argument fails. That's evidential talk, not evidence. You're swapping in rhetoric, countless alternatives, unlikely, without a defended measure or a real rival comparison. The relevant questions are comparative and empirical. What ranges are life permitting? What distributions do rival hypotheses motivate? What auxiliary assumptions are being used? Without denominators and rival accounting, unlikely is tone, not calculation. This misleads because it substitutes vibe math for disciplined comparison. So quick fix, force specificity. What's the sample space? How are you weighing it? What observations would move your probability? Show the data, not the vibe. All right. Evidence manipulation 19, measure smuggling, undeclared sample space, odds talk. So using probability language while hiding the denominator. What possibilities are counted and why that way? What's the sample space? For example, the odds are, while quietly assuming a convenient space of possibilities and weighing rule. It turns a real point into fake math by hiding the reference class. Simple snapbacks, define the denominator. What's the measure? You smuggled the sample space. So probability talk only works if you specify the possibility space and the weighing rule. If you can't defend how you're counting and weighing worlds and observers, your odds aren't real. Again, cosmology and the anthropic principle. Fine-tuning isn't surprising. Of course, we observe life-permitting universe. If it weren't, we wouldn't be here to observe it. So the probability of observing fine-tuning is basically 1. Quick snapback, that smuggles the measure. The anthropic point is a selection effect, but you converted it into an odds claim without declaring the denominator. Probability of observing, given that we exist, isn't the same as probability that a random universe is life permitting, and it's not the same as whether fine-tuning favors one hypothesis over another. To say not surprising in a meaningful way, specify what's being sampled. Universes, observer moments, regions, and how it's weighted. Otherwise, it's a slogan. So this misleads because it replaces the hard probability question with a convenient reference class. So force the distinction. Are you conditioning on observers or claiming fine-tuning is intrinsically probable? Those are different claims. So define the denominator. All right, we're almost done with evidence manipulation. We still have to go to scope. Likelihood laundering, fit talk without rival accounting. Claiming this evidence is exactly what we expect under X or very unlikely under Y without naming rival models clearly, stating what each model predicts, and exposing the auxiliary assumptions that generate those predictions. A quick diagnostic would be expected under what model? Show the rival accounting. So a core example, a speaker claims their worldview predicts the data but never states prediction standards or costs. This misleads because it smuggles models and then announces a likelihood victory. A quick snapback would be define expected. Compared to what model? Show the assumptions. Compared to what? Likelihood claims don't count until you state the rival hypothesis, spell out what each predicts under explicit assumptions, and compare fit, scope, and cost. So some modern examples. The problem of suffering. If an all-good, all-powerful God existed, we wouldn't see this much suffering, but we do. Therefore, atheism is far more likely than theism. Quick snapback. That's likelihood laundering. You're assigning expected and unexpected labels without stating the prediction standard. Theism predicts little no suffering is a specific add-on assumption about what a good God would permit and why. A disciplined comparison requires 1. Define the theistic model, creation aims, freedom, moral formation, stable natural law, afterlife justice, etc. 2. Define the atheist model, what distribution of suffering is expected by what measure. And 3. Compare fit, scope, cost across the total data set. Not just raw suffering, but also goods, moral agency, conscience, love, beauty, order, and the kind of creatures we are. Without that, very unlikely is rhetorical weight, not Bayesian work. It's not Bayesian probability work. So this misleads because it treats moral intuition as quantified likelihood without an explicit model. So a quick fix is to force predictions in one sentence each. On atheism, we expect what because of what? On theism, we expect what because of what? Expected under what model, right? All right, evidence manipulation 21, improbability by story stacking, more surprise without more data. Piling that would be surprising layers as if they were independent data points, one theme gets counted multiple times. Are these independent or the same thing repeated? One underlying fact pattern gets sliced into many surprises and then treated like multiple lottery wins. It swaps examples for independent evidence. So don't double count. That's one theme, show independence. So if your points are downstream of the same underlying condition, you can't multiply them as if each is separate evidence. Justify independence or count them once. For example, philosophy and suffering and so many disproofs. Suffering refutes God because children get cancer, animals suffer, natural disasters happen, people are abused, prayers go unanswered, good people suffer, evil people prosper, tragedy strikes randomly, so theism is overwhelmingly improbable. Quick snapback, don't double count. Most of these are instances of the same data type. Undeserved suffering in a world with stable natural laws and moral agents. Listing many examples increases emotional force, but it doesn't automatically create multiple independent evidential blows. The evidential question is the underlying pattern. What distribution and kinds of suffering exists and how rival models account for them. Don't multiply odds just by enumerating cases. It inflates evidential weight by listing instances of one category. Just because you say surprising under theism and list millions of different instances of suffering does not mean that you've given millions of different categories that accumulate and force, have the power of being evidence and independent lines of evidence. They don't. It's the same problem of evil. So we have to have a quick fix is to have a differentiator, right? Why a cumulative case beats story stacking. So distinct data types, not many anecdotes of one type. Independence or stated conditional dependence, compression into core claims, each step adds new information, rival accounting built in for fit, scope, and cost, explicit prediction standards, not vibes, no hidden denominators, no fake quantification, and survive steel manning, non-redundant points still matter. So a cumulative case adds new information, story stacking adds new sentences. And that's evidence manipulation. So these errors bend evidence out of shape, curating, cherry picking, fake inference to the best explanation, alternative neglect, miscounting testimony, double standards, priors erased, false accusations, maybeism as an explanation, evidence cosplay cluster replaces data with probability talk, smuggles denominators, launders fit claims without modal discipline, and stacks surprise without adding independent data. So the antidote is show the data, name the rivals, declare the measure, respect priors, match confidence to what the evidence can actually carry. All right, we're into our last category. This is semantics and scope drift. Word games. What's happening, people? Where you guys at? If you're gonna be a rando hanging out here, might as well be a rando and type something in the chat. All right. Semantics and scope drift. So these fallacies are word games, bad comparisons, and boundary shifts. These moves don't always look like logic errors because they hide inside language, but they quietly change what the claim even means. So semantics and scope drift. Number one, equivocation. Key terms shift mid-argument. So using the same word in two different senses and then acting like it stayed the same. Common offenders are purpose, design, function, random, chance, nature, science, faith. So examples, design meaning teleology and function, then treated as a guy tinkering in a lab. Random meaning unpredictable to us and then used as uncaused, purposeless. Faith meaning reasonable trust and then redefined as blind credulity. So this misleads because the conclusion rides on a word shift, not evidence. So snapback would be define that word in one sentence and keep it fixed. Lock the definition before the argument and then rerun the argument with the fixed definition and see if the conclusion still follows. If your argument needs a moving definition, it's not an argument, it's a trick. All right, semantics, scope, creep, quantifier, slide, sum equals most equals all. So sliding the scope without permission from a limited claim to a universal claim. Going from in some cases to therefore always, or some Christians are hypocrites, therefore Christianity is hypocrisy. Why it misleads. Your conclusions become stronger than your evidence. The argument wins by enlarging the claim midstream. So a quick snapback would be, are we talking about some, most, or all? So you force the quantifier into the open, write the claim with some, many, most, all, and make them commit to one. And then ask what evidence would justify the exact scope. You don't get to slide from some to always without paying for it. All right. Semantics and scope drift. 3, false analogy. Vibe comparison as proof. So treating dissimilar things as alike in the ways that matter and then drawing conclusions from the comparison. For example, God is like Santa Claus. This misleads because it imports conclusions by vibe instead of relevant structure. Analogies can illustrate, they don't automatically prove. A quick snapback would be similar in which relevant aspects and dissimilar in which decisive respects. So make them map the analogy. What features carry the argument? If the features don't match, the analogy doesn't carry. Analogies aren't arguments, they're illustrations unless you show the matching structure. All right, semantics and scope drift 4, composition and division, illicit part whole transfer. So illicitly transferring properties from parts to the whole or whole to the parts. For example, neurons aren't rational, the mind isn't rational. This misleads because it's category leakage. What's true of components isn't automatically true of the whole, and what's true of the whole isn't automatically true of each part. Does the property belong to the parts, the whole, or the organization and form? Ask for the missing bridge. Show me the rule that transfers that property from parts to the whole. If they can't, it's a leap. So you're arguing from parts to the whole without a bridge. All right, semantics and scope drift 5. No true Scotsman. You could also call this no true scientist. So when faced with a counterexample, you redraw the definition so the counterexample doesn't count. For example, no real scientist doubts Darwinism. This misleads because it moves the goalpost by definition, not by evidence. A quick snapback would be, what would count as a counterexample under your definition? A quick fix would be, make the definition falsifiable. List the criteria up front, and then we can test cases against it. No midstream edits. If your definition changes every time you're challenged, you're not defending a claim, you're protecting it. This is moving the goalpost. All right. Semantics and scope drift. 6. Continuum. Sorites. Fuzzy boundary. No distinction. Claiming that because there's no sharp line, there's no difference. So no exact moment of personhood, so personhood is meaningless, is an example. This misleads because no sharp line does not mean no line at all. Reality can contain real kinds even when borders are fuzzy. A quick snapback would be, are you denying a real distinction just because the boundary is hard to pinpoint? So you got to split the issue. Is there a real difference? Where exactly is the boundary? Confusing those is the move. So fuzzy borders doesn't erase real differences. I would say there is an exact moment of personhood, the conception. All right. Last one. We're done. We're done with fallacies. Semantics and scope drift. 7. Loaded complex questions. Smuggled premises. The question is rigged, so answering it concedes something controversial that we don't want to concede. For example, why does the church hate science? This misleads because it traps agreement before argument even begins. Quick snapback. I reject the hidden premise. Asked neutrally. So rewrite the question in neutral form out loud on the spot. If they refuse, the goal was never inquiry, it was framing. That question is rigged. Remove the premise and ask it clean. So this is a loaded standard question. It's a red herring often. So summary of semantics and scope drift. These fallacies win by changing language instead of proving claims, shifting definitions, equivocations, and enlarging scope. That means some and then shifting that to all. Importing conclusions by comparison, false analogies, leaking properties between parts in the whole, composition and division, dodging counterexamples by redefining terms, erasing real distinctions versus, fuzzy boundaries via fuzzy boundaries, or rigging the question with loaded questions. So the antidote is define terms, lock scope, demand the same meaning all the way through. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my framework for validating truth and dealing with fallacies, with fallacious reasoning. Now, I still have to offer you guys even something preliminary regarding formulating syllogisms. So like a categorical syllogism, conditional syllogisms, inference to the best explanation, and cumulative case. There are many other, like conditional syllogisms and stuff. And I don't even know if it would be a good use of my time to go through all of that. I think eventually it would. But I don't even think I think I need to buy more books for that, honestly. I think I need Socratic Logic by Peter Kreeft. I've read a couple of good logic handbooks from like the beginning of the 20th century, like Richard Clark and Charles Copin's treatise on logic. But I don't think that they define syllogisms as exhaustively as might be needed, because they do describe the structure of like the conditional or the categorical syllogism, and then they do a bit of conditional syllogisms, like if then, and that's and they do a little bit of cumulative case. Inference to the best explanation, honestly, I got that from Stephen Mayer. At the end of the God hypothesis, he talks about how to make a metaphysical argument, and that inference to the best explanation is how you would do that. Given the evidence, what makes most sense. But one thing I really need help with is finding examples, because this is very dry. I need examples of each one of those things. So if you see like some, atheists using fallacious reasoning, or if you see any evidence of how first principles verify truth, things like that, it'd be really good for the channel if you guys were to send me some clips. And you can reach me at heartsoncrosses@gmail.com, heartsoncrosses@gmail.com. That's heartsoncrosses@gmail.com. So next we're going to talk about bias, because when people reject, at first hand, when people reject evidence, or and people try to use fallacious thinking to argue for a untenable position, usually what they're defending is their bias. They don't, they're a priori jumping to a conclusion that they then try to defend. So we're going to talk about biases. We're going to talk about virtue and vice, and we're going to talk about habit and how that forms your biases, right? Because the reason people have doubt often is because of they have emotional doubt. They might have intellectual doubt, and if they do have honest intellectual doubt, we can deal with that with evidence and argumentation. But this is the last step of resistance. This is if we can have an honest intellectual conversation, we could arrive at a conclusion for the existence of God, Jesus, the church, etc. very quickly. It's actually getting to that point that's a problem. So, when we interact with doubt, we're really dealing with people's emotional doubt. They don't feel, they feel for some reason, usually their own sin, far away from God. So they're attached to some passion, some pride, lust, whatever it is. So it's either emotional doubt or volitional doubt. They straight up don't want anything to do with it. If it is intellectual doubt, that's very easy to deal with. But usually it's emotional or volitional. And if it's emotional or volitional, it usually has to do with a vice. And so we're going to study vices now, virtues and vices, and see how virtue is the mean between two extremes. Like you could be charitable, but if you're too charitable, you could be, impoverishing yourself to your detriment to do much good. And if you're too stingy, then you don't help anyone at all, right? And so a virtue is always the mean between two extremes. And we're going to talk about what the frame of mind of somebody that is in either extreme looks like, and how that's detrimental to them actually perceiving a truth. So I'm going to take another break, and then when we come back, I won't take that long. But then when we come back, we're going to be talking about vice and virtue. Thank you all. God bless you.